And I know I'm a little lower on this guy than I think a lot of people are personally. I'm probably the one dragging him down in our consensus rankings. And that is Terrace Marshall, now a Carolina Panthers wide receiver. And the big reason I have him so low is I like him as a prospect. I really enjoyed his film. I thought he was, pretty good catcher. He's a guy who will go up and get a ball, decent enough route runner. And I just think that the draft capital is great, awesome. I think, it's a cool narrative that he's reunited with his college coach. But here's my one issue with that is Joe Brady was already being looked at in some circles to be a head coach in the NFL. And I think that more likely than not, he's probably going to get picked up next year. And that kind of, it's a cool narrative for a year, but eventually, if he's leaving, that narrative is essentially null and void, in my opinion. But and then you look at the receiver room. He's maybe, I would say, probably at best the fourth receiving option on that team. Behind you have CMC, you have DJ Moore, and then you also have Robbie Anderson, who is reunited with Sam Darnold, who they had good chemistry when they were playing together in a terrible offense. So I think moving into Joe Brady's scheme is cool, but how long that's there is the big concern for me. What are your thoughts on Terrace Marshall? How do you feel about him as a prospect, the fit? What do you think?
Yeah, so in the modern NFL, you can never have too many pass catchers, right? Never have too many weapons in your arsenal, and that's what Carolina did by adding Terrace Marshall. They're going to be losing Robbie Anderson to free agency next year, so this is a guy that's coming in to replace him in the following year. But this is a guy at LSU that showed that he needed to work on his route running and show more overall just dominance, and he did that. He came back and he did that. So I like Terrace Marshall. I thought he would go a little earlier, but he did have a nagging foot injury that popped up prior to the draft, so that caused him to fall to Carolina. He stands at 6'3", and he's 200 pounds. He's a little skinny but good size. And at the same time, great athlete. So, there's not many knocks on Terrace Marshall besides maybe his focus. Lack of focus sometimes can lead to drops on tape. One thing that I noticed was he's a very good deep ball receiver, but he does lack a deep ball burst, if that makes sense. He can't really separate from those corners as well as Tyreek Hill can, for example. That's just an extreme example because Tyreek Hill's the best at it. But
Right.
yeah, Terrace Marshall, I think he offers a lot of good depth to your team right now, but I think he's only a starter in best ball, if you need him. But Marshall, I'd be looking at him for a second year breakout, third year breakout. Marshall Jr., he's a guy that I'm taking end of the second, similar to the other guys that I just mentioned. These are all end of the second guys for me. And, I won't be taking him at the 2.5. I won't be taking him at the 2.6. Won't be taking him at the 2.7. So, yeah, Terrace Marshall, good player, but not for me unless it's back of the second.
Fair enough. I agree on all those points, and I will say too, with you mentioned how he played better in his final year, and granted he had a lot less competition for targets, so on and so forth, with Jamar Chase opting out, Justin Jefferson being gone. But he played with a terrible quarterback. The LSU was not a good team, and that's something that I think gets overlooked. But he really stood out on that team as a guy that they kind of had a sense of hope when he was on the field. Other than that, it was a pretty rough shot team.
Yeah, LSU's quarterback was so bad that Terrace Marshall decided to opt out before it hurt his stock. So, yeah.
It's fair enough. Good point.